Okay, so let's start with a short introduction of every one of us. So Rika, you are here on the left, so please, you start.
Anthony, I love how I feel like I'm on a game show or something, I'm going to win a prize. Rika Nakazawa, I'm Group Vice President with Connected Industry with NTT, which is a global technology services company. I'm also Head of Sustainability for the Americas region, and I'm based in Austin, Texas.
That's great.
Great.
Amelia, instead, what about you?
Hello, I'm Amelia Coleman. I am a futurist, so it's my job to know about the latest new and coming technologies and their potential impact on the future of business and our lives. I don't come from a technology background. I owned an illegal speakeasy in New York and then opened the first burlesque and cabaret nightclub in China, got thrown out of China, ended up in the UK, and it took me 2 years to get a visa. And as soon as I did, I needed a job, any job, and I talked my way into a role as marketing assistant at a creative technology agency, and worked my way up and became their global head of innovation, opening up innovation labs in London, Dubai, and Scotland. But after a couple years, I felt a bit compromised, being in a position where I was always marketing and selling these technologies. So in 2017, I went freelance as an independent futurist, working on advising companies around how we can implement responsible technology strategies today that have the best possible outcome in the future. And so I still do that, and I host a podcast called XR Star and a YouTube series called Blockchain in the Metaverse, and I was just named one of the top 25 women in the metaverse.
That's amazing. So I remember when we were discussing about this panel all together, we had a Zoom call about it, and we were discussing about what to talk about today. There was this first topic, okay, we have to talk about sustainability. And you, Rika, asked the question, yeah, but what is sustainability? That's a main topic by itself, for which we can discuss for a lot of time. So probably it's good to start talking about this to set some ground about this panel. So what do you think is sustainability?
So yeah, when we're talking about sustainability, I'm writing a book right now. I had this idea while I was working on getting more corporate women on boards, was a lot of the work that I've been doing in D&I, having been a woman in technology. And as I was talking around the board imperative during COVID, what kept on popping up more and more frequently between 2019 and 2022 is ESG. And ESG is another way that people talk about sustainability. It's environmental, social, and governance. And as I started to see that this ESG topic was really becoming much more prevalent, I was like, well, that's really interesting that during the pandemic, something like sustainability and ESG became much more prevalent. And so I've been really deep into this world of sustainability. And one of the first things I will say is I've gotten a lot of flack for talking about sustainability like it's this novel thing. No pun intended, because I'm writing a book about it, although it will be more factual than fiction, hopefully. And so the topic of sustainability has been around for decades, if not centuries, dating back to when there were conservationists that were working in preserving biodiversity and things like that. So sustainability is a topic and as an imminent issue is not new. However, what is fairly new is this idea of the Anthropocene, which is Anthropocene basically means man-made. So humans are having this direct impact in terms of how the globe is evolving. And so this Anthropocene came about debatably during the 1950s, during the Industrial Revolution. And so this idea of humans having a direct impact on the earth really fomented this environmentalist movement. And then alongside of that was also a lot of the social equities. And so sustainability has really started to become a summation of climate action or environment impact, and also social impact, social equities, human rights, things like that, and of course governance, because you can't address any of those things without governance. And so the UN SDGs came about a couple decades ago, and now sustainability is seen today as ESG in a lot of boardrooms. And so it's really about the triad of people, planet, profits is the most common way I've heard about it. At NTT, we talk about it being connected communities, connected planet, and connected economy. But again, it's probably slippery slope to assume that when you say sustainability that people are thinking about it the same way, because there's just so many different dimensions to it. And today we'll be talking about the metaverse, blockchain, and Web3 components of it.
So sustainability is not just green economy like some people think.
No, in fact, I've had a couple of interviews where people really are adamant that you can't take the social out of the green. I say this very lightly because climate refugees is a very serious problem. I lived in the Bay Area from 2006 to 2021, and by the time it was the third set of fires, and it was like that fire, the one that everybody was posting pictures of San Francisco in like this really weird red haze. I have bad asthma, and I was getting asthma attacks living in the Bay Area. So I moved to Austin, which seemed like a good place to be, and it is. It's a great town. But so the whole social justice piece, I was able to afford to move to another city. But that social equity and rights for human beings is becoming more and more fundamentally tied to climate issues and some of the challenges of sustainability. And the downstream and upstream effects of sustainability also has direct correlation to impact on humans and social equity. So it is very much interwoven.
Yeah, that's very interesting also because I myself was thinking that was more or less always when you talk about sustainability, it's about environment, about green. It was interesting also to be part of this because myself I started discovering it's more wider topic than I thought initially. And it's also interesting that you said that sustainability has many dimensions, many different opinions about what it is. So since we have also another speaker, Amelia, what's sustainability instead for you?
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree. I think kind of put plainly, I would say it's about prioritizing the long-term well-being of the planet and its life forms over short-term monetary gains. To me, it's about responsibility, accountability, action, and also hope that we can have a better future.
Makes sense. And I want to go on with another question that may seem, stupid, but I think it's also important to ask this, is why you choose things we should pursue it? I mean, it's just a matter of PR, it's a matter of karma, or what are the reasons for which you have to aim for sustainability? Why it's important for the whole world?
You want to go first?
Sure. I think, the reason we're sat here today is because enough individuals have voted with where they're spending their money for sustainability. So across the board, from baby boomers to Gen Z, the majority of people have said that they would choose sustainability over a brand name, which I think is really hopeful. And for me, it's not just about the future of the environment in the world. It's also about the future of the workplace, very simply. I think, Gen Z, 76% of them have said that their number one concern is climate change, and they are entering the workforce in the next 3 years, and they are looking to work with companies that are purpose-driven and value-led. And those are what is important for them when choosing a career and looking at who to work with. And then you have Gen Alpha, who are the children of millennials coming into the workforce in 2030. And they've already said, so there was kids between the ages of 6 and 9, 2/3 of them said that their critical mission in their life was saving the planet. And this is a generation that is expected to have 2 to 7 times more extreme weather events in their lifetime than any previous generation. So they're right, and we have to prioritize this. Also in 2030, corresponding with that, we're pushing 9 billion people on this planet, and also we're gonna have the largest population of people over 60. And so we're looking at a workforce that is having the longest range of ages ever. And this is something that I think needs to be prioritized by everyone, and sustainability is the future.
Yeah, that's cool. I also appreciate your mention. So you're saying it's not only to have, of course, a better planet and a better future, but when a company makes an investment, can also have a return on their brand reputation and so on. It's really also like business investment. Sometimes can also be useful in that sense.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. So
Yeah, why sustainability? Well, the word sustainability means something to be sustainable, and I think that during COVID, with all the disruption, what became very interesting was there was a lot of more investments that went into ESG funds that were saying that they were focused on aspects of ESG. And part of the reason for that is because they realized, I forget which group did this study, but in the financial sector, they found that those organizations that had some hygiene around environment, around social, D&I, and had governance performed better than those companies that did not. And what was interesting about that was that it was less about, people were going to give more credit to organizations that did good, right? So that you had this notion of, well, sustainability is a good thing, or UN SDGs are the right thing to do for the earth. It suddenly became a risk factor, right? So if you don't have transparency and understanding what the upstream, downstream effects of what you do are going to be, or if you're not going to pay attention to your people and understand, especially with more and more companies that become globalized, and certainly during the time of the pandemic, as people moved into distributed teams, risk became a correlative to the attention and focus to sustainability. Just to underscore the point around the business aspect of sustainability beyond sustainability for good, but really sustainability for good business, Gerard Cunningham, who runs sustainability for McKinsey, gave a startling presentation a couple of weeks ago about how over the next 30 years, there's going to be $275 trillion in revenue. $275 trillion in revenue. This is from McKinsey. That's going to be generated over the next 3 decades. So whichever camp you're in, if you're in the camp of the bioenvironmentalists that are like, we have to do something quickly because we have approximately 1 dog year left, which is why you see a lot of commitments around sustainability for 2030, and it's 1 dog year. I have 2 dogs. I'm a dog mom, so I like that, that calibration. We have 1 dog year left to get this right. Otherwise, that window, the movie Don't Look Up, people, laugh at it and think it's funny, but it's like, come on, for a lot of us, we're like, that window is closing quickly if we don't get there. And it's a collective thing. It's not like you opt in or opt out. It's either everybody opts in or, we're not, I don't want to say we're doomed, because I'm an optimist in this whole scenario. So whether you're a bioenvironmentalist or whether you have kids and you're like, what kind of earth are we leaving for our kids? Or you're a capitalist and wants to figure out how you're going to monetize in this whole space, all you have to do is really, on the third category of really thinking about the money-making part, private equity companies are buying sustainability technology companies every single day. And if you need, and if there's a private equity person in the room, forgive me for saying this, but historically, private equity people have not known to make investments out of the goodness of their heart, per se. It's really motivated by money and capital and the returns that you can get. So there's a lot of different reasons to do sustainability, but what not to do around sustainability is to greenwash, because that's simply going to dilute the whole movement in a way that's going to create a lot of skepticism and a lot of, I would say, damaging impact on a lot of the energy and investment that's going into this space. And so a lot of different reasons why. Antoni.
Yeah, I think it's very fascinating what you said, and I also appreciated that the practical also view and the money side that you said about this. I think it's important to relate also this for the world we live in. And I want to go on a bit talking about the technology involved, because I'm a professional in XR. I think all of us are professionals in what now everyone calls the metaverse, the M word that I hate it now after all this buzzword, but it's still what we love, what we aim for the future. And XR and blockchain have this like double reputation now. Like on one side, people say, okay, this can save the planet, can be green because people don't travel, can have meetings with holograms. Other people say, yeah, but if you digitize everything, you need lots of money to power the servers, the telcos, or the NFTs now had lots of problems, and crypto in general because of the energy consumption they create. So in the end, these technologies we're working on are favor sustainability or are against sustainability, or both of them maybe. So Rika, what's your take on this?
My personal experience of where technology could be seen as the bad guy, I worked for NVIDIA for 4 years, And I remember very clearly building my SLI PC, which is 2 GPUs in parallel to create a gaming system. I know I don't look like your typical gamer, but I was in that world for a bit. And the thing is that we would joke, like my then husband and I were like, oh, we don't need a heater anymore. We can just use your SLI rig. This is awesome. So that was sort of, and this is before I came into the space. So as I've been coming into this space, it's a fantastic debate. It really is, because there's all kinds of data about the number of transactions. Like, I think it's like 100,000 credit card transactions, and Bitcoin is like 16 times that in terms of the amount of energy it consumes. Or Bitcoin mining is 0.46% of total energy consumed. There's all kinds of data out there. Where I'm very optimistic, as I was saying earlier about this whole arena, is that yes, NTT, one of the areas that we're growing and really people are spending, or enterprises are spending money on, are data centers. But there's a lot of good news. There's a lot of good news stories within this picture of energy and digital. And certainly during the COVID-19, it was a great digitalization, right? That everybody had to figure out how to get connected. And sure, the Bitcoin or crypto industry really grew in that time, and a lot of different ways that happened. And so you could say that this is going to only get worse. But the good news is there's a lot of really great minds and unicorns and decacorns that are examining innovation in that space. At NTT, we have something called IOWN, which is Innovative Optical Wireless Networking, which is about using photonics to be able to create the networks of communications, which is going to be less intensive from an energy perspective, for example. But there's a lot of innovation that's happening in the space, and I think that there's the scalability of some of the ways that the bigger hyperscalers are looking at being able to deploy a digital fabric and a digitalization that's happening around the world and across a lot of different industries. Even in the Bitcoin space, right? You have a lot more proof of stake versus proof of work, which is less computationally intensive and energy intensive, that's happening. I'm not sure the science or the technology behind this, but I've been reading about carbon negative blockchain, which is something that if anybody here is an expert, I would love to learn more, because I was coming across that recently. And meanwhile, you have the World Economic Forum that last month just launched their Crypto Sustainability Coalition, and bringing together big names like Accenture and other players around the table. I think their numbers are around 30 members right now, but that's going to grow. So there's a heck of a lot of bright minds that are looking at this space to try to figure out how to innovate around this. And to your point, the digitalization is really helping to offset a lot of things. And that's not just on the environmental side. That's not just on the green side. The impact of the things that are happening with the metaverse and Web3 has a lot of potential for us, right? People get very wrapped up on climate because the world's going to end in 2030, those kind of narratives. But there's also a social piece here that is a critical thing for us to look at. Because if you don't have the social balance in place, it doesn't matter if we save the earth, right? There's a lot of the disruption that we can also address through metaverse, Web3, and blockchain. And blockchain in particular, what I'm excited about is blockchain's ability to authenticate the carbon trading that's happening. Because there's a lot of greenwashing going on, and there's a lot of statements, and people are signing up to different institutions and doing reporting, and there isn't really the level of accountability that blockchain could actually provide. So being able to provide that level of transparency is going to be material in terms of really holding these larger enterprises and industries accountable, in particular petrochemical and oil and gas, some of the dirtier industries that are really working hard in this space. So I'm hugely optimistic about it, and think that the digitalization that's happening is actually going to inverse around the other way and create new innovations that's going to help us be more efficient, find new ways to create that balance around E, S, and G.
That's good. So she's very optimistic.
Yeah.
What about you? Are you optimistic, or are you thinking that we are all making the planet to die?
Yeah, no, I agree that blockchain has some amazing potential. I'm really interested to see where that's going. And for me, I tend to specialize in the metaverse.
Yeah.
So I've really been investigating this topic around, is the metaverse bad for the environment? I just did a TED Talk on it on Monday. And it's a question that is just receiving so little attention, study, and discussion that, it's made me wonder if I'm the only one who has these concerns, or if we're all just kind of like running late to this party. and it is something that we should be talking about today. So there's this theory that I keep running across, that if we all use virtual reality, that we're going to lower our carbon emissions because we'll be traveling less by cars and planes. But I would challenge that on two points. So one, we know that navigating 3D spaces produces lots of data. And when we move into these metaverse spaces and include headsets in that, the amount of data that we're producing expands exponentially. And with terms like the cloud, it's easy to think that data is this abstract thing, but it's rooted to the world in a very real way through the energy it takes to store it, which creates a carbon footprint. So the more data that we're creating, the more places we need to store it. And today, data centers take up between 2.5 and 3.7%, or they contribute to the global greenhouse gas emissions. And at that height, that's almost twice as much as the aviation industry. And then secondly, if we're looking at gaming as the model for the metaverse, we know that today gamers, the average single gamer, pumps 2,000 pounds of CO2 into the atmosphere every year just by the energy that it takes to power these 3D environments. And that's the equivalent of driving 2,250 miles, which is like driving from here to Ghana or the UK to Libya. And that's without a headset. So to me, while comparing the unknowns of the metaverse with what we know about gaming isn't an exact science, it does confirm my suspicions that we are looking at a significant risk, that the adoption of the metaverse will result in a huge unprecedented demand on energy, which could have a major increase on carbon emissions. And I say could for a reason, because I think that if we identify these risks early and aren't afraid to talk about it, then we have the time, the opportunity to act and make sure that we're implementing some of these solutions that you're talking about today, so that in the future it does become more sustainable and we're not sacrificing our physical world for a virtual world.
So it's very cool. And I was, when she was speaking, I was very interested to hear again a mention about the human side of this sustainability. So I want to hear also your impression. I mean, we talk about how XR, for instance, can make people from all over the world to study inside the most important university in the United States, maybe. These other opportunities in which XR can promote inclusion, or anyway, some other social aspects. So what's your point of view on that specific side of the social sustainability that XR and Web3 can give us?
Yeah. So I talk about this quite a bit, is we really are at this precipice where we could either promote equality through these technologies, or it could go in the other direction and actually create more inequality. So kind of starting on the inequality side, people who have access to these technologies, access to 5G, edge computing, we saw what happened during the pandemic with kids who had access to the internet and home computers versus kids who didn't, falling well behind. So this is something that has the potential to create more inequality in that respect. It also has equally the potential to create equality in that we can offer these kind of opportunities like you were talking about with colleges, to anybody can actually go and study in these places. But also within these metaverse environments, we're already seeing people making a living out of generating products and contents and services in these spaces, basically starting with nothing, just an account inside a metaverse, and then building an entire enterprise around themselves. And that is a huge opportunity that I think has never been so accessible to people. So I really think it could go either way, and it's up to us, the people in this room, to make sure that we make sure that it goes towards equality.
Yeah, so one thing that in what has everybody, I'm going to assume it's 100%, but everybody's worn a VR headset and gone through an experience. So, there's a bell curve of people that can keep the headset on for a full day and they're totally fine, right? Lucky, and that's how, Oculus, I'm sure. But then there are the people that want to throw up within the first minute of having, I'm in that category. Technology's gotten better, the frequency and all that. But what I do think about is how immersive experiences are going to help us viscerally really feel the impact, because one of the biggest challenges with solving for E, S, and G is just because it's not in our backyard, right? And just to, I'm not on TikTok. I'm not a TikTok creator, but the feed that I get is, you can probably guess now, a lot of dogs, a lot of animals. And it's really hard for me to see those feeds every once in a while when it's an animal suffering. And it's even worse if I'm in an immersive environment and seeing a polar bear starving to death on a melting iceberg. And I'm being a little dramatic here, but I do think that there's something about this immersive experience that's going to make these experiences very visceral, to the point that people are really going to start understanding, like, holy crap, my kid's going to be experiencing something like this, or the animals in the Amazon, right? There's 80,000 acres that are disappearing of wild nature every day. And so immersive experiences that can help us feel that, and in turn also what I was talking about, social equity before, right? Nana in the VR world, she's an amazing creator. She did a lot of her early work around issues around immigration and racism and things like that, and recreated experiences for people to feel directly with a headset. And so that's the other piece here that I think we need to think about, because when we talk about Web3, blockchain, and metaverse, it's easy to get, well, at least in some circles, it's easy to get caught up in the clinical side of it and the virtualization and feeling like it's not real. But if you can really take advantage of that immersive experience, then I think that that's something that as humans we can internalize and therefore get that message across and really feel the impact.
And now I want to go a bit, on the practical side. And you also work for a big company, and for sure, since you're an expert in sustainability, you know what, let's say, companies, big companies, small companies, what challenges are having towards reaching sustainability. So I want to ask you, from your experience, what are the most common and biggest challenges that companies have in implementing sustainability, and also, if you have also some practical steps that you can suggest to the audience on how to reach them, if someone is from a company and maybe if you have some suggestion on how to reach, let's say, these ideal values of sustainability.
So first, I'm not a sustainability expert. I'll just call that out right now, because I think
you know something about it.
I know,
Otherwise,
I know
it
a few things.
wouldn't be.
No. So I say that with a little bit, and with that. Thank you for that. And the reason why I say that is because I do think that this whole arena is one that's going to continue to evolve. So it's a journey, not a destination where everybody is like, oh, we finally figured it out. The thing that we see that is really important for people to understand is how ESG and sustainability is fundamentally embedded in every part of your organization. And I think that that's what makes it a little bit difficult, because CSR reports were sort of the early days of sustainability within an enterprise. But corporate social responsibility was like, okay, we need to do a report, and it was just a compliance thing, perhaps. And then D&I would be under HR. And what's happening more and more is that with ESG being a boardroom level issue, it's now become an imperative for the C-suite within an organization to finally understand, what the imperative is from a pure business sustainability perspective. And I think one of the biggest challenges around it is just the wicked problem it is. Wicked problem is a term used in the or in other industries too, where it's like a spaghetti. Like, you don't even know where it begins, you don't know where it ends, you don't know where the interlacing happens, because it's such a big problem. Because you just look at the supply chain snarl up that happened during COVID-19. There's a lot of things that are interconnected across this that no one party is going to be able to figure it out. And so the biggest challenge is, well, where does the accountability lie, and how do we understand how the butterfly that flaps its wing over here that makes the tidal wave on the other side, how on earth do I map all that out, and where do I pull the levers? Because there's all kinds of stakeholders that are involved in that. I met a woman who lives in, I think it's Ecuador, and she was telling me how she's been fighting to keep the oil and gas companies, the fossil fuel companies, out of her backyard, so to speak. And she's indigenous tribe. And she said, and now that we have a precedent of having kept them out with a legal precedent, now they have the EV companies, the battery companies coming in and trying to mine the earth for rare minerals and lithium and all these other things. And it's, and on the one hand, people are like, oh, we're green, we're EV, we're good guys. And it's like, no, actually you're not, because you're still coming in and doing extraction, but of a different kind. So I think that that's one of the biggest challenges that companies have, is really to understand upstream, downstream, and how everything is interconnected and how to solve for this wicked problem. And my advice, well, if I try to simplify it, is just really to examine how emerging technologies are coming in to help. And not just Web3 and blockchain and metaverse that we're talking about here, but other technologies like IoT and AI, and elements of metaverse are built into this too, like digital twin. But it's really understanding, what are the problems that you want to solve for, and the why, right? The why, speaking of purpose-driven, which I love, Amelia, that you brought that up, is like, well, what's the why, and how are we going to solve it? But you have to start somewhere, and you have to know you have to be able to measure, you have to be able to improve that. And over time, that starts to snowball and become a virtuous cycle that helps the business.
What about you, Amelia?
I think we're going to see a huge challenge around the social side of onboarding and getting people adopting blockchain, Web3, your average person. I know that most of the people in this room probably can wrap your heads around it and understand it. I know for me, it took me ages to kind of get to a place where I could explain it and understand it, but still, that's a whole presentation on its own, right? So we're, asking people to trust and to take our word for it that these are the solutions. And it's a really big concept, what Web3 and blockchain's potential to restructure our world. And to get your average person to buy into that, I think we're really going to have this demonstrative value proven. And that's going to be a huge learning curve, I think, for people. So I think there's lots of potential there that is really exciting when it comes to the potential of these technologies, but making sure that we have the use cases in place that can kind of make people feel included. I think at the moment, the complexity of blockchain and Web3, because it's so complex, it feels elitist and it feels exclusive. So to your average person, telling them to just trust me, you're going to benefit from this, that's a harder sell. And I think that's a challenge that we're looking at.
So the time is almost up for this panel. Before we arrive to the Q&A with the audience, I want to ask you a last question. And since there is the hype for the metaverse, let's ask a question about it. So what's your vision for your sustainable metaverse? Simple question.
Yeah, right? Ultimately, I'd love to see a carbon neutral metaverse, one that didn't rely on offsetting, one that could just be neutral on its own. I would love to see us be able to, harness natural energy. I think about if you could harness the energy of a 3-year-old kid or your puppy running around the house to power your metaverse, or I think that would be brilliant. So that's my idea.
I'm working towards it. So I have this idea. So the book that I'm writing is really examining how sustainability really amplified during COVID-19. So I've been interviewing a lot of people. And the idea on the other side of the book is to create a Web3 community where people can share those experiences of how they saw sustainability in action. And I'll give you a small example. So I'm from Japan. My parents still live there. And it was kind of difficult to get there until recently, but still I could go. I have a Japanese passport. So I was there in June, and I've been thinking about this whole Web3ification of these stories, because part of the challenge as well, that why it's a wicked problem and why people kind of throw their arms up in the air and they're like, well, it's not in my backyard, is because it seems overwhelming, right? If you're walking around with your aluminum can in your hand, you can't find a garbage, you're gonna be like, what difference is this gonna make? I'm just gonna throw this in the regular garbage, right? And that's a very human thing to do because we don't see the direct impact. We're like, we're one, sample size of one, what impact can I have? So the example that I wanted to give to you about sort of these micro moments, I'll call them micro-sustainable moments that we can share through a Web3 community that nobody owns but everybody's a part of, is that I was in a ramen shop in Japan, 500 yen ramen. Now with the exchange rate, much cheaper ramen. It's extraordinary. But anyway, so I went to the bathroom, and there was a handwritten note on the wall of the bathroom that said, after you use the bathroom, before you flush, please close the lid. This helps with our carbon footprint. And I was like, wow, that's, again, don't know the science behind this, but the point is that there was this micro moment of somebody bringing attention to an action, small act as it may be, that in aggregate is going to add up. So I would take a photo of that that post, and I would put it on the Web3 community, which is tentatively called the White Swan. Long story behind that. And after 5 thumbs up from people that said, yes, this post actually exists in this random ramen shop in the middle of Shibuya, I would get tokens, White Swan tokens, crypto, carbon negative, so that's what I'm going to work on. Crypto token that I can then exchange for socially conscious companies. So say REI. Once I get into tens of White Swan tokens, I get 50% of REI or Marks and Spencer or any other company that's overtly being socially conscious. So that's my vision for the metaverse, is where it's going to be a propagation of shared experiences where we can all celebrate on those micro moments that demonstrate the impact that we can all have. So.
And that's,
What's yours, Tony?
no, I'm the moderator. I have no. The time is up, so I won't answer for that. No, seriously, the time is up, so I will just thank you two for this amazing debate about the sustainability. I really learned a lot by listening to you two, and both about the environmental side, the social side, and also the business side, or what can be sustainability. So first of all, I ask every one of you to make a big applause for these amazing speakers. And then we can start with the questions from the audience. Please.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Colin from Holo Native. You mentioned these one dog year or one dog life, the next 7 years that are going to be really significant. So the next 7 years are going to also be really significant for the metaverse, or how it's going to shape. So what do you think? What is the direction we are moving? And do you think in 7 years the metaverse will be a good thing for the environment or for social sustainability? Or will it be, will it not add anything? What do you think? What is the direction we're moving?
Yeah, that's a good question. I agree that we have the opportunity to create emotional, memorable experiences that are going to help promote sustainable causes. I think, on the other hand, for these big technology companies, we know that they're all trying to come out with headsets, glasses, and their business goal is that eventually this moves from being a shared technology to a personal technology where we all own a pair of smart glasses. And a big part of that, achieving that, is because of networking. So moving to things like the cloud. So as soon as we can start to push all the processing and computing to the cloud, then the headsets are going to get smaller, lighter, more fashionable, and less expensive, which is going to move forward their goals. But at the same time, like I was saying before, navigating these 3D environments, whether that's through augmented reality or virtual reality, creates massive amounts of data. And I think how we handle that data is going to be the big question out of whether this is positive for the environment or not.
One dog year, one of the interesting moments I had when I met a woman at South by Southwest, and the only reason why I met her was because I was like, why are people like it was like Moses walking through the ocean. It was like people were making way for her, and everybody knew who she was, and she was the one representative from the Ukraine that made it to South by Southwest. She hitchhiked, rode horseback through Germany, and then got a boat across. Yeah, I'm kidding, but she was the one person that made it, and everybody knew who she was. This is late February, March of this year. And so I went up to her and I said, I'm writing this book and it's about sustainability, but I'd like to interview you because I think you have a very different version of sustainability. Not a different version, but another dimension of sustainability. And sure enough, when I interviewed her, it was a Zoom call after the event, and she said the first thing she said was, if the sirens go off, I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to end the interview because we have to leave. I was like, yes, of course, right? And what was interesting was the story that she told me. She said that, so she was with the Ministry of Digital Transformation for the Ukraine, which was an organization that was founded by Zelensky after he came into the leadership role. And the first project for the Ministry of Digital Transformation was to get cell phone, like mobile devices into as much of the population as possible because they wanted to digitalize the community, right? Like Estonia is one of the most digitally advanced in Europe, as some of you know. So a lot of these movements by governments to try to digitally enable their people was part of the task at hand. So they had this roadmap. I don't remember what time frame it was. Maybe it was a couple of years. But when COVID happened, they're like, oh, crap, we need to bring this timeline way in and digitally enable our people sooner than later because we need a communication method to reach our people. So because they pulled that timeline in around the time of COVID, that when the Russian invasion happened, guess what? They now had they could weaponize mobile devices through communications. And if some of you might have read some of the things around using Telegram and other modes of communication, they were able to share intelligence about what was happening in this mesh across the Ukraine. So when I think about the next dog year of what we have to 2030 and the Paris Climate Agreement and all this, I think about sustainability on a few different levels now because of some of the research that I've done. And I have to believe that in the next 7 years, the alpha generation, the millennials, the later generation millennials, and Gen Z, as they come into these roles, that they're going to have outsized influence on some of the policies and the ways that we're going to drive things forward, from sustainability of nation states, sovereignty of people and communities. And also, there's going to be more and more baby boomers who have tremendous wealth. They're going to be continuing to retire and living longer, right? I forget what the life expectancy, but I come from Japan. My father just turned 90, and he's going strong. We're telling him to give it to 100, please, another 10 more years, and we'll see where we are. So as you have the baby boomers and you look at these socioeconomic factors, I have to believe that they're going to be like, okay, we need to, we made all this money, we're now retired, we did what we needed to do, we did all this, now what? And it's going to become quite evident where we are in the next 7 years. So I think those investments that are going to be made around efficiencies and a lot of the good that can come out of the metaverse, a lot of the different ways that companies are going to be able to leverage things like digital twins so they don't have to use physical product and create a lot of waste. A lot of focus is going to be happening around e-waste, right? The Western world is exporting a lot of the sustainability issues to developing countries, and that's going to be something that people are going to be focusing on. So I'm really optimistic. I think the next 7 years, the metaverse is going to be purpose-driven. I don't think it's going to be Ready Player One, where we're all going to be, or WALL-E, right? Like, it's scary how some movies, you're like, ooh, that's like frighteningly possible, where we're going to be just a screen in front of us and floating around. So, but to your point, Colin, I think that the next 7 years are going to be very interesting in terms of how all this is going to play out because of all these different factors that are going to be moving forward.
Last question for him. Hey, hello.
Excellent conversation. And my question is regarding ABS from a holistic perspective. What do you think about public intervention from governments or law institutions? And what do you think about them in such a globalized world and about their effectiveness?
Where are you from, Victor?
From Spain.
You're from Spain. Okay. You want to go, Amelia?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is one of the challenges that we have faced for a while, especially with, big technology companies, is when it comes to regulation, because we don't have one global government to kind of oversight these technology companies. That's what's happened with Web 2, is these big tech companies have made the rules, and we've all, had to go along with it and sacrifice our data and our privacy and security, all these kind of things, because there is no regulation or oversight on these big companies. And that's the concept of Web3, is this idea that we're going to reclaim some of that power back. But again, that does bring up the concerns around, so if nobody's in charge, or if we're all in charge, do we really trust ourselves as a society to make the right calls and to be the judge, juror, and executioners of, people when things do inevitably go wrong, or there are bad people or criminals, when the dark web comes into Web3. So I think there is huge room for debate there. I don't think I have the answers, but I do know that a lot of people in this industry would welcome some kind of regulation. Because if we're all playing by the same rules, or there is just a set of standards, then we can work within that framework, and it would be helpful.
Yeah,
About
I think
1 minute.
Yeah, 1 minute. The frameworks are helpful, and I think that there needs to be the era of increased public-private collaboration, because we need to have certain standards, and also I think the notion of government hopefully needs to shift as well, right? Rather than, and I think blockchain can play a part in that in terms of transparency of where do our tax dollars go, kind of thing. So I think that if we leave it to market forces, that's not going to work. If we leave it just up to governments, that's not going to work. COP27, it'll be interesting to see what happens there. But ultimately, I do think it's going to be a blend, a hybrid of public-private partnerships coming together.
Okay, so that was a great answer, and the time is unluckily up. I will stay speaking with you two for the rest of the day, but there is time for this event. So thanks again for me here, and thanks to you for listening to us. Have a great AWE.